Unspoken Issues.
All right, well, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Unspoken Issues podcast. We are doing another Unspoken Epics. That's right. We are focusing on a 6-issue story titled Heart of the Hawk. Came out in Darkhawk issues 10 through 15, started in the latter part of 1991, probably rolled its way into 1992, written by Danny Fingeroth, Mike Manley the penciler, Ricardo Valagran as the inker, Joe Rosas as the colorist, Bill Oakley as the letterer. And look, it's Darkhawk. Like I told Chris Armstrong, I said, don't come on this podcast. And then he said, how dare you, sir? Now, this is obviously...
keep me away.
This is obviously Chris Armstrong's baby. Chris, welcome back to the Unspoken Issues podcast. As always, sir, I'm glad you're here to help me along with some Darkhawk. Are you ready to talk some Darkhawk?
Good to be here. Always eager to talk a little DH.
I like it. And, Evan is a guy on Earth. Yes, that's right. Evan Bevins. Evan Bevins has joined us this evening. It's been a while since you've been on Unspoken Issues, I think. Welcome back. Are you ready to talk the Heart of the Hawk?
I am.
All right.
Although I have to say, I've told you how much I like Darkhawk, but going back and reading this, turns out I was talking about Darkclaw that whole time.
Whoops. Oh, well,
it was really awkward.
Confused.
No, I have been a Darkhawk fan for a while, although I bow to Chris Armstrong's superior knowledge here, because this actually ends about 2 issues before I started reading Darkhawk.
Well, Chris, you said we had to talk Heart of the Hawk, man. This, like I said, this was your baby. You wanted to get together and chat about it. I mean, just kind of lay it out there for the people. Why this story?
A while back, probably maybe a year ago, we decided to start doing more, rather than just focusing on single issues, doing more like crossovers and like extended stories. So I knew once we made that decision that I was going to have to get this storyline in there sometime, because Darkhawk, he's my favorite comic book character. Most people who may ask, I may have done the spiel before, most people who ask like, hey, who's your favorite superhero? I usually just say Captain America, because like, somebody who's not like a big comic nerd isn't even going to know who Darkhawk is.
No, they would have no
whereas
clue.
Captain America would really probably be more like number 5 or 6 down the line, because most of my favorite characters are, like Darkhawk, Prime from the Ultraverse, Bad Rock, those guys that don't even really get published anymore. And so he had this was his first like multi-part story, really. He had there were a couple of issues that had Spider-Man guest starring where he fought Hobgoblin in the early issues, and then there was a 2-parter where Lodestone, who we see in this story, was kind of the villain. But as far as like a big multi-part story, this was kind of the first one and the best one. There's another one later. We covered the finale of that Return to Forever storyline on an episode a few years ago.
Right.
They kind of revealed the Darkhawk origin after, a couple of years of mystery and stuff. But this is the better of those 2, multi-part arcs.
Yeah, I was just going to mention how, what was it, Darkhawk 25 or 20?
Yeah, 25 was the finale of that. Had a big red foil embossed cover.
That's right.
Classic.
That's right, baby. Yeah, it was. Yeah, so, as far as my knowledge of Darkhawk goes, I learned a lot, obviously, hanging out with you and talking about issue 25. So I wasn't reading this character too much, I think. And I may have mentioned this when we did the that issue or the episode on issue 25. I think Darkhawk shows up in Avengers, and I cannot remember.
Oh, Avengers Arena.
Thank you. Yes.
Right.
So I remember Darkhawk showing up in that.
It's a smattering of appearances over the last 20 years, 25 years, I guess. You don't see a whole lot of him. Well,
let's go ahead. What we'll do is we will real quickly kind of go down through the main characters that we're going to see through this arc. Like I said, this is 6 issues. Chris, do me a favor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw, the character out there. You kind of give us an idea of who they are and get us prepped for where they're at in this story. Or prior to this story, I should say. So Chris Powell, we'll start with Chris Powell, the guy we all came here to talk about, Darkhawk.
So yeah, Chris Powell, he is a high school student. He was kind of like a Peter Parker for the 90s, I think. I think that was kind of the angle they were wanting to do with Darkhawk when they launched this new character. So he's a high school student. His dad is a cop and his mother is the district attorney. He kind of stumbles upon his dad in the first issue taking some payoffs from some mob guys, which will, that comes into play in this storyline. It turns to a big scuffle, and he comes across this amulet in this scenario that gives him these superpowers. So he uses the amulet. He can transform into the Darkhawk body, basically, which is he can shoot a big force blast out of his chest. He can use the amulet to make an energy shield to protect himself. He's got a cable claw that can help him. He can kind of use it like as a Wolverine claw, or as like to kind of take flight with some wings that he also has. So that's kind of the gist. He's a high school student that's kind of his personal life's kind of in turmoil because of the stuff going on with his dad and his mom.
So yeah, let's talk about his dad and his mom. His mom's name is Grace. Dad's name is Mike. So Grace is the district attorney. We're heading into issue 10 here. Anything big happened to Grace prior to these issues that you can think of off the top of your head?
Interestingly, she has, she's targeted this mob boss, Philip Bevins, who she's trying to prosecute. And he's the guy that was sort of paying off Mike in that first issue scenario. And then Mike kind of gets caught taking a payoff, and then he runs off and disappears. So her life is obviously kind of in shambles now, but she's still trying to do her job. And now Bevins, who knows she's going after him, in an issue earlier, she sent a hitman after the family at like a museum, and Chris got shot in that whole thing. So she knows that like her whole family is kind of in danger, which in some ways kind of makes her seem irresponsible at points during this story. But that's kind of what's going on with her. She's trying to go after this guy, and she's kind of worried about where her husband is and stuff like that. So the whole family's in kind of a bad way as these issues are going on.
Yeah. So Mike took off at the beginning of this series, is that right?
Yeah, that issue 1 that happens in, he has we see very little of Mike up to this point. Pretty much just that first issue. We see him at home with the family briefly, and then we see Chris and his brothers stumble onto this payoff he's taken, and then when he gets found out, he's like, he runs off. He's kind of ashamed, I guess, because his kids saw him doing this and stuff, so he runs off.
All right, so the brothers...
And we don't see him again, really, until this storyline, 9 issues later or whatever.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, it seemed like, it seemed like he was awful surprised that, his dad had popped back up, so I figured he'd have been gone for a while.
Yeah, he's kind of been on the run, hiding out since that first issue.
So yeah, his brothers Jason and Jonathan, I assume they're there. They probably didn't play much of a big role in the first 9 issues, did they?
Not really. They're just, Chris's little brothers. They're twins. The dark-headed one is kind of the nerdy one, and the redhead less so. But they're both, there are allusions to them like struggling, what's going on with their dad and stuff like that. But they don't really play a huge part, really.
Okay. All right. St. Johnny, this guy. I remember us talking about him in issue 20 when we talked about issue 25. He was still kind of at least aloof at the beginning of that, and then we start to realize some of the big things that's going on with this guy. And of course, this is what close to between 10 and 15 issues prior to that issue dropping.
Right.
And the mystery abounds for sure, but kind of give us an idea who St. Johnny is going into this story.
So yeah, St. Johnny is like a homeless guy who lives in this abandoned amusement park near the Powell's house. And the amusement park is where the payoff happens, and Chris finds the amulet in the fun house of that amusement park. So St. Johnny was there at the very beginning in the first issue, and he even referenced Chris as the Darkhawk in the first issue. So that's where the name came from. And stuff. And he would pop up. Chris kind of got a feeling that St. Johnny knew more about the amulet than he was letting on. So that's why we see him kind of go to him and try and get information. But St. Johnny's always kind of like at 1 second it seems like he does know what's going on, and then the next it's like he has no idea who Chris is or like what the Darkhawk is or anything like that. So yeah, that kind of continues on up until that 25th issue.
Okay. All right. His girlfriend, Chris's girlfriend, Cheryl. Now, she doesn't play a huge role in this Heart of the Hawk, but I mean, she's there. Cheryl, girlfriend of Chris Powell. I didn't really have much else to go on other than that. Anything that you could add to that?
Not really. I mean, she's the girlfriend. Her and Chris's other like high school friends and stuff pretty much just play the role of like concerned friends about Chris because he's, going through a tough time with his, the stuff with his dad and stuff like that. And he's always kind of like debating whether he wants to tell her if he's, the Darkhawk or keep her in the dark and stuff like that. But
okay. Yeah, that's right at the beginning of this story. It's like, oh, he's about to tell her, and he doesn't. All right, Evan, it's your turn, buddy. Do your best to tell us about Tombstone, if you know much about Tombstone. If not, Chris can always pop in here.
Well, I know Tombstone is, he's one of those Spider-Man villains that always seems to pop up here and there when you need a muscular guy. Speaks softly. Is pretty strong, pretty. Not totally invulnerable, but pretty durable. I think I probably know him most from the old Fox cartoon, the Spider-Man cartoon, and lately he's worked his way up to crime boss status. I think here he was still kind of a middleman, leg breaker type, but obviously he wants to branch out on his own. So I always think of Tombstone as a strong guy in the New York underworld.
Chris, you and I have talked a lot of Tombstone here lately. When we were doing Dead Man's Hand, we were talking Tombstone then. And this is happening right about around that time because that whole hand thing is going on too. Mm-hmm. He wants to get back at the hand, and that's the whole reason he's doing what happens here in Heart of the Hawk. But I think my first interaction or my first experience of reading anything with Tombstone in it was the I want to say Spectacular Spider-Man. I could be wrong. It might have been Web of. It was him and Robbie Robertson. I think he has like a history with him, if I remember correctly.
They grew up together, I think.
I remember the story arc where I think Robbie is in jail and Tombstone's kind of like either his cellmate or something. And but anyway, so that's about the only experience I have with Tombstone. Anything you can add to that, Chris?
I didn't know a whole lot about Tombstone outside of the few storylines he popped up in, mostly this one and like Evan said, the old cartoon, Spider-Man cartoon. But I looked up some stuff about him because I was kind of curious how he got his powers and stuff.
Okay.
Which is the classic, comic book, chemical accident that grants him his powers, basically. I didn't realize he is actually an albino African American.
Okay.
And, he's got these sharp, pointy teeth, which I assume was part of like whatever gave him his powers and stuff, which is essentially just like he's got like rock hard skin. And like super strength. Yeah, he files his teeth like that as like an intimidation technique or whatever.
Right.
Which I thought was kind of interesting. Yeah.
Wow. Until we read Dead Man's Hand, I didn't realize that he had teeth like that. I had no idea.
They may come and go based on the artistic, the artist's like renditions and stuff too, possibly.
Yeah. All right, so then we got Felipe Bazin. You already kind of mentioned he's had run-ins with Grace and the Powells before. So anything else you could add to this crime lord that is currently being prosecuted?
That's pretty much it. He's, because of his threats against the Powell family and stuff, Darkhawk has kind of made him a target, in the early issues. He's always going after Bazin for one thing or another. And, as a result, Bazin is also targeting Darkhawk a lot. He wants the amulet because he knows it's the source of his power and stuff like that. So,
was Allegra in the comics prior to what we get in these issues?
I'm not sure where her first appearance was. I know she was in the storyline that had Lodestone's first run-in with Darkhawk.
Okay, so Allegra
would have been issues 7 and 8. So she was there for at least that early.
Yeah, Allegra is Felipe's daughter. So she is in these issues because her dad's going to court and she's there to support her father. So that's all I have in regards to characters here that we're going to be running into, at least in these first two issues.
I've read a couple of the early issues, and then I came in right after this, so it was kind of interesting to fill in some of these. I knew some of the basics. Darkhawk's one of those that I've been picking up, trying to complete the whole run of at different shows and stores I go to and everything. So I've got a big chunk of them. So I was able to pull these out and finally read through them. Oh, I will say, Jesse, we actually started, I think, one issue too late for you because the Punisher's on the cover of issue 9.
No. Oh, well, I know he's mentioned in this book, and I was wondering when that happened because that's where Sergeant Steel or whatever the name is. I can't remember his name already.
Savage Steel.
Savage Steel shows up. But I know the Punisher was mentioned by Darkhawk at that point, so I assume Savage Steel was in that issue, and that's what happened, or is this happening some other way?
Yeah, Savage Steel appeared first in issue 4 and then came back in issue 9, which is the Punisher issue. Because a lot of these early Darkhawk issues, there were a lot of guest stars. Issues 2 and 3 both had Spider-Man. And then issue 6 had Daredevil and Captain America. And then issue 9 had the Punisher. So a lot of Darkhawk interacting with, established heroes and stuff, and showing his rookie mistakes and all this stuff in the early issues, and boosting sales. I'm sure was the main reason those guys popping in.
It helps legitimize a hero too. I mean, you're palling around with some of the more established guys, that's going to help establish that. I'm looking at that cover right now. I don't mind the way Manley drew Frank there on the front. Looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to go into issues 10 and 11, the first two parts of this story. So I'm going to do my best to do a quick synopsis here. I wrote a lot, and I apologize. I don't know if this is too long or not, but we're gonna let's just see how this goes. That synopsis is coming up, but first let me talk about Amazon Music. If you're looking for a good platform that can fill those musical needs, Amazon Music has you covered. If you head to getamazonmusic.com/W2M network, you can get a free 30-day trial where you can check out over 70 million songs. That's getamazonmusic.com/W2M network for that free 30-day trial. So let us start with Chris's mom, District Attorney Grace Powell, who is currently involved in a case to convict crime lord Felipe Bazin. However, things begin to get dangerous when a car bomb meant for her explodes, hospitalizing her son Jason. Enraged, Chris becomes Darkhawk to go confront Felipe, but learns that his mom's key witness is about to be killed. Trying to stop this before it happens, Darkhawk fights off some armored assassins, but due to the trauma of the attack, the witness dies of an apparent heart attack anyway. A couple of days later in court, Chris sees his dad Mike there. Even though he hasn't seen him in a long while, Mike blows Chris off. And I say blows Chris off. He takes off out of there and leaves. Desperate for some answers about the amulet that gives him his powers, Darkhawk goes looking for St. Johnny. When he reaches the abandoned amusement park, he realizes that the villain Tombstone has beaten him there and is attacking St. Johnny, looking to acquire the same amulet that resides in Darkhawk's chest. The two begin to fight, with Tombstone near impervious to any of Darkhawk's attacks. He soon goes for the amulet. However, out of nowhere, Tombstone is stalled by some tear gas and a mysterious figure who says he had the amulet before, but runs off without saying much else. Undeterred, Tombstone finds Darkhawk and continues the fight. Tombstone tells Darkhawk he wants to get back at the hand, and the amulet may hold the power he requires to get his revenge. Just as Darkhawk seems to be getting control, Tombstone rips out the amulet from Darkhawk's chest and looks to kill Chris. Now, checking back in here real quick with Grace, things aren't going well in court as witnesses now are becoming hard to find. They're beginning to change their story. So the case against Felipe is kind of crumbling in front of her. Not only that, I mean, she's got the added stress with her son being in the hospital and knowing that the guy she's prosecuting is probably the one that put him there. Cheryl, Chris's girlfriend, has a little bit of a run-in with Allegra, Felipe's daughter. In the courtroom, Felipe is not happy. He yells actually takes his daughter aside and says, "What are you doing? You got to kind of keep a low profile." But then Allegra decides, okay, well, she shows up and just slaps Cheryl in front of everybody in the courtroom. So she doesn't exactly keep a low profile. Wonder why she did that. I don't know. And let's talk about the brothers, John and Jason Powell. Of course, Jason's at the hospital and John's there for support, obviously. And I think he also doesn't have anywhere else to go, considering his dad's not home and his mom's at the courtroom all the time. So John's kind of hanging out at the hospital with his brother. But someone shows up to finish the job and looks to kill Jason. But luckily, Mike shows up, saves the day, and then runs off again. But the damage is done. Apparently, Jason, the doctor tells John that Jason may not make it. So there you go. That is Darkhawk issues 10 and 11. First two parts of this story right there in a nutshell. Evan, we'll start with you, man. What are your thoughts here on our first two parts of this story?
Well, like I said, I knew a little. I mean, I knew some about Darkhawk and had read a couple of the early issues, but I thought they did a really good job in this issue and really in this era of comics, catching you up and making sure you understood what was going on without having to read, everything that came before. I mean, we got the Cliff Notes version. It probably helped that I understood who some of these characters were, but I forgot about Chris's girlfriend. I forgot he had brothers, or that there were two of them. And I felt like, they did a really good job either with, the editor's notes or just some expositional dialogue that wasn't too clunky, just letting you know wherever he fits in. Like when he fights off the guys in the armor at the safe house, he's like, hey, I took these guys on and I didn't have anybody else helping me out. So we get an idea, that he's worked with other heroes. He's still kind of new. It just, tells us a lot about him pretty quickly. And I thought that was good. It references the Punisher. And, the other thing that I think is pretty neat about this is they really balance. At first you look at some of the conversations, it's like there's a Hobgoblin, there's Tombstone, later on Venom pops up and you're like, oh, is he just, taking care of Spider-Man's leftovers or whatever? But They do a really good job establishing his own supporting cast and his place in the Marvel Universe. I mean, this story works even if it's not in the Marvel Universe, if it was just a Darkhawk only story, like back in the olden days when, two superheroes never appeared in the same movie or anything like that. So I think that's pretty interesting. The way they do that is establishing him in the Marvel Universe, but he's got his own story and supporting cast. They do a good job of balancing that.
The assassins show up to kill that guy, and he lives they apparently have the safe house in Riverdale.
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty funny. I wasn't completely lost when I started reading this. I was worried I was going to be I could pick this up and I could be in the middle of Darkhawk's fight for something and kind of understand easily, okay, what's he doing? And we even have, Tombstone, who is upset about the hand. That's all we needed to know. We didn't need to know like anything else. We didn't need any of that mystical stuff as to what's going on. We just know Tombstone wants the amulet because it's powerful and he thinks it's going to help him.
And they give you the little asterisk with the editor's note to whatever issue of Daredevil his problem with the hand happens. So if you want to,
yes,
you can. You don't have
helps.
to, but you can if you want to.
Tombstone ripping that amulet out. Chris, I mean, did you think that was going to happen at all?
This is going back 20 or almost 30 years now, I guess. So yeah. I don't remember, but I do remember when it did happen, I was just like blown away. And you really don't know anything about how the amulet works, where it came from. Like, it's all kind of a mystery. And so just like Chris's perspective, like, you're like, what happens now? Like, is he going to, like, is that going to kill him? I mean, it seems like it probably would. Yeah,
just like you said, there's a big mystery as to how it's going to affect him, because now, see, that's one thing that they don't really go into a lot in this comic, other than the fact that he turns into Darkhawk, and when Tombstone takes the amulet, he cannot change back into Chris. Is the suit appearing around him and he's still alive inside the suit? Or is he, when he pulls this thing out, is it attached to his body somehow? Mm-hmm. You have no clue.
It was established in earlier issues that the amulet, there's kind of like a healing effect where he can, if he gets hurt, like there was an issue earlier in the series where his hand was like blown off in a fight. I think with Savage Steel, actually. He changed back to Chris, and when he changed back to Darkhawk, the hand had been healed and he was like whole again.
Okay.
It doesn't work the same way with Chris. Like when he got shot by that assassin I referenced earlier, he gets shot in the leg. When he changes to Darkhawk and then back to Chris, he still has like the wound in his leg. So that's just another like element of like, well, what's going on here?
Well, another piece of the puzzle. Right.
Had they shown him, because there's a couple scenes we'll come up on without his helmet, had they shown that yet? I can't remember if we knew at this point, spoiler alert, that he was actually switching bodies.
There is an issue where he takes the helmet off and looks in the mirror, and the reader never sees it, but he's like horrified by what he sees. I think in the issue, maybe issue 12 in this one, he makes a point to like not look,
Right.
Because he doesn't want to see it again because it freaked him out so badly the first time.
They really like to keep that mystery going, which I appreciate. I appreciate that, especially, the part where I talked about how somebody shoots tear gas at Tombstone. I don't think it's revealed that it's St. Johnny. I don't believe, is it? I think
it's implied that it's the previous wielder who.
Okay.
He kind of rescues Chris at that point. I mean, it doesn't show who shot the grenade or the tear gas, whatever. But
exactly, the guy shows up and says, "Yeah, I used to be the owner of the amulet," and then he gets out of there. And the only person that sees it is Chris. Chris is the only one that sees it. And he knows, and that's what drives me nuts a little bit about this. Is like Chris knows exactly who this guy is. The reader doesn't get to see him. But again, I appreciate it too. I like that. I like the way they kind of add to the mystery and keep adding to the mystery.
I like in issue 10, the first part, they establish right away. They kind of set up the two main storylines, which is Darkhawk and his conflict with Tombstone, and then the trial stuff that's going on with Grace and Bazin, which is a kind of a cool. I think the trial stuff is a cool angle for a superhero comic. The car bomb, like I referenced earlier, they'd already been the target of an assassin previously. So, like, what is Grace doing? Like, hey, go start the car. There are no cops protecting the house or anything. Just going on like life is normal, which is kind of
car bombs were like the assassination attempt du jour in the early 90s. I mean, I hadn't read this, and she's like, go out and start the car, and I'm like, well, what if there's a bomb in it? Before I even turn the page.
Yeah, so it's just kind of makes her seem a little less responsible than you would think she should be. I like the fights. There's a lot of action in this first issue, especially before he even gets to Tombstone. He fights some thugs basically in an alley, and then he has the fight with the armored guys, who I don't think have appeared in anything except for this issue. They reference them as working for the Foreigner, who is like a Spider-Man character. He talks about how I beat him on my own, no help from anybody else, because like I said earlier, he's had all these guest stars, even in the issues where it's just been him, and he's like when he fought Lodestone in those issues. I guess he technically won the day in that story, but it wasn't really on his own, even though there were no other superheroes in that particular story. So he's never really had any success on his own outside of beating up drug dealers and stuff like that. So he obviously took a lot of pride in that, which was a cool step for a young superhero and stuff.
Evan, who are the UFOs? I
think they're sort of like a twisted version of the Fantastic Four.
Okay.
They're mainly Hulk villains, empowered by different like kinds of radiation. I mean, in what I've read about them, their team name is by far the coolest aspect.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're kind of like enemies of the Hulk. I think they got wrapped up in some Gamma stuff, but also sort of like an alternate Fantastic Four.
Got it.
Just kind of a tail of the tape deal on Tombstone versus Darkhawk. I looked up the Marvel trading cards for Tombstone. His strength is listed as a 4.
All facts.
And his durability is a 5. Darkhawk's strength is a 4 as well. That's Marvel Series 2. So they're comparable as far as like their strength.
And for those of you who are familiar with the old TSR Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, when I needed to use those trading cards to translate them, 4 was incredible 40. Because I didn't have any Darkhawk stats, so I had to use the trading cards to translate Darkhawk in there. I believe that's Spider-Man level strength, if I'm not mistaken.
Second phase rip mention that I've heard over the weekend. So yeah, yesterday I heard one, and today I've heard one. Something the universe is telling me something. So
start an old phase rip play along podcast in all your spare time.
Well, there is legitimately a phase rip podcast out there. I don't know if I've ever shared that with you, but there is a phase rip podcast. So yeah,
but they're not likely to have me on. That's why I want you to do one.
Talk to them. I'm sure they'll make room. All right, Chris, go ahead.
Sorry about that, Chris.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Again, the trial thing. Obviously, Daredevil is a lawyer, so I'm sure there was some like trial stuff in his books that I've never really had never been a big Daredevil guy until basically the late 90s, early 2000s. But this was new to me, like seeing this kind of trial interaction stuff.
Court procedural type acting, yeah.
And that was kind of like in the zeitgeist, I guess, or whatever, because like I looked it up and courtroom drama stuff was taken off around this time. Court TV launched in 1991, which was the same year this storyline started. Law and Order had started in 1990, and the John Grisham books were just starting to come out in like the late 80s, early 90s, and then those movies obviously started coming out in the early 90s as well. So that was kind of like a big part of like pop culture around this time. So
interesting.
I guess that's one of the reasons they kind of were cashing in on that too.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. That's really neat. All right. Well, anything else there before we get into the next two issues?
Just reiterate that splash page with him ripping the amulet out is epic.
Oh, wow. He tries at it twice. Of course, the first time, like I said, he gets shot at with some tear gas. And I mean, it looks like he is about to rip it out of his chest at that point. You're just thinking, well, Darkhawk's going to be able to stop him from doing this. There ain't going to be any problem. And then, I mean, yeah, he rips that thing out, and Tombstone looks like a man possessed. And it's not blood, but there is definitely some damage happening to Darkhawk. It looks like
there's basically a bunch of green goo like spurting out of the chest cavity there.
Yeah,
it's antifreeze.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead. We'll hit in these next two issues here. This is issues 12 and 13. Yeah, I guess before I get into this, we talked about Savage Steel. Chris, you said there was an interaction with Savage Steel prior to this. Give me an idea what Savage Steel meant to Darkhawk prior to this story.
We kind of get the origin of the Savage Steel armor and stuff later in this. Up to this point, I think issue 4 was his first appearance, and he shows up and basically kills some, I think, drug dealers or drug runners, maybe. He's basically presented as sort of a Punisher with a low-rent Iron Man armor, essentially. And then he shows up again in the issue that the Punisher guest stars in, and even though he kind of is playing it the same way as the Punisher, just killing. His mission is to basically kill criminals. He sees the Punisher as a criminal as well. Obviously, kind of conflicting views a little bit there, but yeah, he's essentially Punisher with armor.
Okay. Well, as Darkhawk is still reeling from having the amulet ripped from his body, Tombstone looks to kill him, but St. Johnny reappears, changing his arm into a blaster, shooting Tombstone in the chest. Already in possession of what he came for, Tombstone retreats with Darkhawk's amulet. St. Johnny takes Darkhawk into the sewers to try to help him recover, but Darkhawk leaves shortly after, worried about his brother Jason. Donning a trench coat and hat he got from breaking into his own house, Darkhawk wraps his chest up to stem the mysterious energy that is leaking out of him, and heads to the hospital to check on Jason, only to learn from his brother John that Jason may be dying. Back in court, things take a crazy turn when Felipe's own son takes the stand and testifies against his father. After the testimony, the jury then finds Felipe guilty, but as the sentence is passed, through the walls bursts Savage Steel to execute Felipe. Darkhawk arrives at the same moment and stops Savage Steel from killing Bazin, but this gives Felipe the time to escape by a just appearing helicopter. Grabbing onto the hanging ladder, Felipe is surprised to see Mike Powell grabbing onto the bottom rung as well. Chris watches helplessly as his dad flies away. Now Chris has to work to find him, and after kicking over a few criminal rocks, Darkhawk finds out Bazin is most likely on an island in the Caribbean called Althea Island. Sneaking onto a plane, Darkhawk is found out mid-flight and gets into a fight with some of the crime lord's underlings, resulting in the plane crashing. Even though his power is waning, Darkhawk is able to walk away from the crash. But unfortunately, he is soon attacked by Venom, who is wondering why Darkhawk has invaded his island home. Meanwhile, Tombstone is having he's basically trying anything to understand and harness the power of Darkhawk's amulet, but he's having no luck whatsoever. After all of the insanity at court, Grace is still trying to cope with her son Jason being in the hospital, but it hasn't stopped her from investigating the savage steel attack at the courtroom. And when she sees a group of people unloading the armor, she plans to call the police, but is captured by one of the men. Also, Allegra, checking in on Allegra here, we find out she ain't so bad after all, because she's the one that convinced her brother to testify against her father. So even though the way that I took it was that it was like a big production when she went up and slapped Cheryl. I don't think that was, you guys might have a different view of it, but I think she did it in order to kind of throw off her dad. Allegra's not so bad after all. She got her dad into jail. So that's where we end issues 12 and 13. So we're going to start with you, Chris.
Evan had sent that message about the coloring and stuff, which I think was from this issue, with like the weird look of the blues and blacks and stuff.
I can't remember if it was this one or one before, but
I know Darkhawk's
mine looks the same way, and I think what it might be is just like a coloring issue because of like the shift to like a higher quality paper, because the early issues of Darkhawk especially are on like that really crappy newsprint. Like they look terrible now. They're all like muddy and like dirty looking, you know. And I think maybe there was something with them switching off to the higher quality paper in like the early 90s where the coloring wasn't quite right yet. I've got a trade paperback of the Todd McFarlane solo adjectiveless Spider-Man issues, and they're all on glossy paper in that trade paperback, and a lot of the dark black and dark blue stuff is really odd looking. I'll send you guys some pictures of that. They look really weird on the glossy paper, which was different from the paper that was printed on in the 90s and stuff. So I think there's something to do with the coloring is why that stuff looks that way. But yeah, Darkhawk 12, actually I noticed that this is the month of the price hike where the good old $1 an issue Marvel Comics went up to $1.25.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're right.
Big jump for a 10-year-old, 11-year-old this time.
Yep. Right, dude.
So yeah, that's when that happened. More of the like weird stuff with St. John, you know, his arm turns into, you know, a laser rifle basically. And, you know, Darkhawk can't get a straight answer out of him. He's got this energy just leaking out of his body, which is a really cool, artistically, I really like the look of those like dark, you know, black and purple bubbles and like all that energy. It's very cool effect. Given how like the Darkhawk origin is eventually revealed in issue 25, I wonder how much Fingeroth was just kind of pulling a Lost, basically, just throwing a bunch of crazy stuff in the early issues, and then when it comes time to actually have to finally reveal everything, a lot of it doesn't really add up. But it was a good journey, just like Lost. It was the journey, not the destination on that.
Yeah, I want to talk about St. Johnny real quick, and just how, again, he's an enigma wrapped in a mystery. When you got him shooting Tombstone with his arm that turned into a laser, and then Darkhawk's like, "Hey, where'd that come from?" He's like, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about, man?" And I was like,
literally seconds later.
I know, dude. It's like right after that. So, okay. All right, St. Johnny, whatever you say, brother. And I think that's pretty much what Darkhawk feels like. Darkhawk, I think, Chris knows, like, it is almost impossible to get answers from this guy, which is funny because he shows up there in the first place to try and get answers from this guy. And then he just continues to get, like, every time he asks him a question, you know, this guy is just, I don't know. I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, you know, I turned into a robot. No, it didn't happen. But yeah, good old St. Johnny. Crazy stuff.
So Bazin, I don't know if he would actually be in prison while his trial is going on, but I like the touch of him he basically takes over the warden's office.
Yeah.
He's hanging out in the warden's office, being served cake while he's on the phone with his daughter, just showing you that there's different rules for the rich and powerful. I also like how Chris, he's stuck in this Darkhawk body, but he wants to see his family. So he's basically pulling a Ninja Turtles and throwing a trench coat and hat on over this massive android type body. But it works, the scarf covers all, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's where you learn that his voice changes, apparently, which you may never even knew that happened.
His word balloons or whatever have a different look to them, but you can't, you don't hear it, it's a different effect of reading it.
Yeah, his brother says your voice sounds different. Oh yeah, I got a cold. Yeah. Oh, okay. I sound like a robot when I get congested. All right. That's the way I picture it. That's the way I picture it. So I was right saying that Allegra was doing a production when she slapped Cheryl, correct?
I don't know, because her persona is more of like a bratty teenager, and she's not a good person. Her interaction with Cheryl kind of seems typical for her personality anyway. She just has no patience for people she's not benefiting from, basically.
Yeah.
Does Allegra go to school? Because she's about Chris's age, right?
I think she might be in college.
Okay.
I can't remember.
I couldn't remember for sure, because she hangs around in the book for a while.
Yeah, she's there's a lot more interactions with her and Chris later down the line.
I thought they picked up the pace a lot. I enjoyed the first couple issues, but I almost felt like that could have been squeezed into one issue. Back in this era, you didn't get part 1 of 4 or part 1 of 6 or whatever very often, unless it was a big deal. Nowadays, the beast is combing out his fur, part 1 of 3. Everything's getting ready for the trade, and maybe it was just coming into it cold. But that first issue, especially, just almost felt other than his little brother with the car bomb, it almost felt just like a pretty standard issue. It didn't feel like it had earned the 6-part treatment yet. It really starts to pick up into high gear here. Although now I'm going to harp on one detail. In issue 11 and 12, they both say guest starring Tombstone.
Oh,
it's like guest starring Tombstone. I don't know. It was just, and it's weird that they did it twice.
Yeah,
it's like I don't know. He is holding the amulet. Does that make him Darkhawk? Maybe.
The term guest star is usually reserved for other heroes.
Heroes, right?
Yeah. So it's. He's not the only villain. Also, I really like I said, this was the first time I'd read this, but I picked these up at different shows, and I'd seen this cover to number 12 several times. That really tells you everything that's going on, with the amulet missing and stuff. And how about those rats on the cover? Those things are almost scarier looking than Tombstone.
Yeah, dude, that one down at the bottom looks horrifying.
Yeah. But speaking of covers, I love the cover to issue 13 with Venom. It's really weird. I can't decide how I feel about the way Manley draws his face, because on the one hand, it's really distinctive. It's almost cartoony, but then it's like, well, look what Venom is, all teeth and tongue and green drool. How are you supposed to draw that realistically? And then with the webs over Darkhawk's face, still hiding the face, keeping that air of mystery. I just think that is an excellent cover.
Those eyes on Venom are definitely different. You don't usually see them much more. They're supposed to look menacing, but I've never seen them look like it's like random salt teeth.
They've got that jagged outline on the outside of the whites there. It's definitely seemed like a Manley twist. I don't think I've seen that anywhere else.
That's because he's down in the Caribbean and the sun's in his eyes, and it affects. Do I get a no prize?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
In the story itself, I thought it was interesting, and for a minute, I just thought maybe it was, inconsistent writing, but I think it was actually kind of intentional. The way Chris is just all over the place, like when he's getting the stuff from his house and all bandaged up, and he'd fallen asleep. He's thinking to himself, help the world, right? On my one long ego trip as Darkhawk. I swear if I live through this, I will help. I'll make a difference. Okay, and then 2 minutes later, he's like, I'm going to be better. I'm having this near-death experience. I'm going to be the hero I want to be. And then 2 minutes later, he's grabbing St. Johnny going, I'm going to kill you if you don't talk to me.
Yeah.
For a minute, I'm like, man, the writing's all over the place. But I think that's where Chris is. I don't remember how much they get into this. And again, it's been so long since I've read the issues I read. But in more recent Marvel comics, they've talked about like how being Darkhawk really put a lot of stress on Chris mentally and how he really struggled with it. And I didn't remember that, 20 years later. But I mean, in these issues, you see he's just all over the place. We're an issue or two removed from him telling the Punisher, hey, you don't kill people. And then he's like, I'm going to kill Bazin or Bazin. I'm going to kill St. Johnny. I'm going to put this dude's face on a grill till he talks. I'm going to kill Venom just cause. He's all over the place.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think that's intentional. I don't think it's just finger off going, okay, well, he's a hero. Oh, now I need him to say something cool. I think there were some pretty intentional choices in this.
Yeah.
As with Darkhawk's complete inability to banter and threaten people. Like when he shows up on the plane, he's like, well, to quote Gomer Pyle, as all the cool kids in the 90s were doing.
Well, I'd do it today.
I'm not besmirching Gomer Pyle's reputation. I'm just saying I don't know how many teenagers in space armor would be But I mean, hey, he's new at it. He hasn't had a chance to take a bantering and improv class with Spider-Man. One other sign of the times, I think it was in issue 12. You mentioned the testimony changing. They said, "Oh, why are you changing your story?" And he goes, "Oh, I guess you misunderstood. I got one of them bad long distance carriers."
Yeah, buddy, that's some good 90s stuff right there. This is 6 issues of Darkhawk, early 90s. I don't think I got one 90s not reference. And I always appreciate a 90s not reference. Didn't happen in here. Now, we're going to talk about Venom real quick before we get into these next 2 issues. So we might as well do it here. I mean, Venom shows up like at the very end of this thing. Venom, hot property at this time. Yeah. Definitely, if he's showing up in a book, he's going to be people are going to pay attention. But
I was actually a guest star.
I was going to bring up the Venom thing, which is it's interesting. I had to check because I was thinking this must be a pretty early Venom like appearance outside of Spider-Man books in 1990, late 91, early 92. I tried to find confirmation of that, and I found a website called the Complete Marvel Reading Order.
I've heard of that.
And if I'm reading this correctly, the first time Venom appeared outside of a Spider-Man book was in Quasar number 6 in '89.
Okay.
And then the next one besides the Spider-Man appearances was Darkhawk number 13. Okay. Well, sorry, the graphic novel The Vault, which was a one-shot, and then Darkhawk after that. So outside of the Spider-Man appearances and that graphic novel of The Vault, this was the first Venom appearance outside of a Spider-Man book. So
we actually talked about this on one of the Carnage episodes that we did, at least what's kind of going on here, where Venom is at. This is explained in this book, which is great. But Venom has been left alone on an island thinking that Peter Parker, or I should say, thinking that Spider-Man's dead. On the Unspoken issues that we covered, I think it was the second Carnage arc. Maybe it was the first. Maybe it was the first. But anyway. The first one is when Venom comes back from the island. Okay. Spider-Man and the Torch go and recruit him. That's right. Yeah. So at that time, that's where I found out, oh crap, Venom's been away and he thinks that Spider-Man's been dead this whole time. And we're kind of like in an adventure that includes Venom on this island. I'm curious as to how much other stories are told about Venom doing solo stuff on this island. If there are any. This might be the only one. I wasn't familiar with it, but even in the recent Venom arc that Donnie Cates did, he went back to the island. I think when he was fighting Carnage, they made some reference to it, and I may have heard about it here or there, but that's the first time I was really familiar with it. Yeah, Venom showing up here in this thing is pretty cool. He's going to have Chris is going to have his hands full. I mean, as if he isn't hurt enough. He's leaking freaking purple energy from his chest, and now he's got to fight Venom of all people. So it's going almost like bad to worse. I like
like you did, what you mentioned about the mystery. They're maintaining the mystery. I agree with Chris. Darkhawk definitely seems like a kind of early '90s update of Peter Parker, but he's not just Peter Parker. I mean, his Peter Parker has bad luck, but his dad's not on the take, and his family's not getting blown up by car bombs. You've even got almost a little element of Wolverine besides the cable claw, but just with this ongoing mystery, that keeps building up, and you keep getting hints at, and then with the courtroom, you got a dash a Daredevil thrown in there. So there's familiar elements, but it's pretty interesting what they do with it. And then, like I said, I remember reading retroactively about Chris's kind of mental struggles with Darkhawk, but this really illustrated it without him going, oh, being Darkhawk is tearing me apart. I am wanting to be a hero, and it fits in really naturally.
I just wanted to point out, Grace is still involved pretty heavily. She's trying to track down the guys that are smuggling the armor out, and she gets caught. Like, even though the trial stuff ended in the last issue, they're keeping her active in the story, which is kind of cool to keep that thread going.
How is there not a cop with her or something? I mean, I know they hired that one dude who was in the Savage Steel armor in court, but I mean, she hired him on her own. It's like, well, the DA handling this high profile case has, been blown up and shot at, and maybe somebody should keep an eye on her.
I want to say even it's possible in one of the earlier issues that she refused to have a police escort because she didn't want it to seem like she was intimidated or something. I may be imagining that or conflict or confusing.
Let's go with that. Let's go with that because I like the story. I don't want to nitpick it.
It would be fine if it was just her or maybe her and her husband, but you got 3 kids.
She's got twins, so she can afford to send one to check the car.
Man, I do want to point out that the one of the screenshots that I posted on Twitter was Grace at the coffee machine. Poor John's in the back. Kids, number one, this is kind of an accurate portrayal of a child trying to deal with trauma, especially in order to comfort their parent. Mom, it's going to be all right. I promise it's going to be all right. This kid doesn't know that. But where Grace is sitting at the coffee machine and she's like, okay, I admit it. She's saying this out loud. Okay, I admit it. Maybe I am a little stressed too, but we'll get through this. We will. And then in a thought bubble, she says, I think I'm going to die. And I was like, yeah, Grace, I think a lot of people probably say something and think the other all the time.
It's a relatable panel.
Yes, indeed. I think I'm going to die. All right, here we go. Issues 14 and 15 of Darkhawk, the final 2 parts of this story. Well, hey, before we get into it, we already talked about Venom. We talked about why he is where he's at here, and why he thinks Spider-Man's dead, and why exactly he's stranded on this island. Lodestone is going to be popping up in the synopsis here. Give me an idea here, Chris, again, who Lodestone is, or what in the world, because she shows up for, I think, a cup of coffee basically here, and then gets dispatched pretty quickly. But Lodestone,
Polaris.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, that's all I know about her. Go for it, Chris.
She's essentially just Basin's personal superpowered bodyguard, which he has. He used his vast fortune to basically give her these magnetic superpowers. She's kind of like a low rent Magneto type. He has a device that he can kind of use to control her, so she won't betray him and stuff. So she's kind of like almost his superpowered servant.
Okay. All right. Well, so here we go with the conclusion of Heart of the Hawk. As Darkhawk tangles with Venom, he tries to stay alive. However, when Darkhawk is weakened for a moment, Venom attacks. The leaking energy from Darkhawk's chest causes Venom to pause, giving Darkhawk the chance to overtake him and apparently knock him out. And I got in parentheses, not really. And we'll talk. I'm going to try to remember to bring that up. Finding a boat, Darkhawk tries to escape the island, but soon realizes the boat is taking him in circles, so he lands the boat back onto the island. But he's soon confronted by some thugs that work for Basin. Darkhawk makes quick work of these guys, but realizes he made it he's made it where he wanted to go. Finding his dad, Chris tries to rescue him from Felipe and his men. Felipe then calls out Lodestone to deal with Darkhawk, but Mike, Chris's dad, tries to attack Bazin in the process and gets stabbed for it. When Bazin turns his gun toward Darkhawk, Mike is able to get a gun himself and shoot and kill Bazin before he can get off the killing shot. Meanwhile, Darkhawk manages to expend a good bit of his own power, nailing Lodestone with a Dark Force blast. Chris makes his way over to his dad, who begs him to stop others like Bazin who might take his place, and then dies in his son's arms. Darkhawk plans to get up and make it home, but collapses at the edge of the beach, and when he awakens, he is surrounded by the local military. But he is able to escape by hopping on a local plane and heads to New York. I love how he gets on the plane and everybody's like, don't worry, man, you're good. He's in costume and everything. And they're like, he's afraid they're going to be scared of him. No, man, take a seat. You're good. Just hang out with us. We'll be glad to get you there.
Oh, the pilot's from his neighborhood.
That's right. Arriving at New York, Chris is led by his suit to find Tombstone and the amulet. Hitting Tombstone with some high voltage, Darkhawk knocks him out and takes the amulet back. However, it won't repair itself. Accepting the fact that he may be dying, Chris heads back to the hospital as Darkhawk to be with his family. When he reaches there, he learns his mom hasn't been there in some time, discovering she was captured by some of the same men that were involved with his dad. Darkhawk finds and rescues his mom. Stumbling into an alleyway after guiding Grace to the police, I believe is what happens. Chris grabs his father's diary that he took from his house earlier and begins to read. He learns his father partnered with other cops to develop the Savage steel armor to become vigilantes. In order to create it, though, the officers were on the take from Felipe Bazin. But soon, others in the group began to take it too far, killing criminals. Wanting to get away, Mike was looking to get one last payoff and leave. After realizing this was the day Chris became Darkhawk, Chris looks down to see the amulet has turned him back into his human form. Checking back in with his family, Chris finds out Jason is going to be okay and that his mom is already aware of his father's death. Afterwards, Chris struggles with throwing the amulet away, but decides to carry on for his father and fight crime as Darkhawk.
A lot of great action here. You know, I said it started out a little slow. It definitely did not finish slow. You know, the fight with Venom was good, and even though I'm like, okay, I know it's Darkhawk's book, but he took down Venom awful quick, and it turns out Venom's just like, he's a good kid. I was just done fighting him. You know, he's like, Darkhawk's like, oh no, I killed him. Well, okay, that's terrible. And then Venom's like, he's probably going to die anyway. Just let him go, do his thing. I like that it made sense that he won. That Venom was like, okay, let's just move on. Then you get some more of Darkhawk with his rookie superhero banter. There, Bazin is telling the people to finish him up. He's like, oh, I still want to study you, but I've decided it'd be more convenient to do it to your remains. And Darkhawk goes, Baz, man, when I finish with you, there won't be any remains remaining. and again, at first I was like, oh, come on, man, and then I'm like, no, I think Darkhawk's just really bad at trash talk. I think that was intentional. And then the next page, Lodestone's hurling jeeps at him, and he goes, no, you can open that junkyard you always dreamed of, Phil. And I'm like, I can just see Spider-Man going, oh no, man, you're doing even Bazin's giving him crap for it. When Lodestone has Darkhawk restrained and Bazin's getting ready to shoot him, he goes, you better kill me, because if you don't, I'll erase you like a disease. He says, I'll convey your regards to whoever the current bearer of the amulet is, along with the charming mixed metaphor that was your last words. So at that point, I'm like, okay, yeah, Fingeroth knows that Chris isn't intimidating anybody. But and it's cool. You had his dad, save him, and then Chris was all, obviously horrified that his dad died, but they didn't, it wasn't like, oh, well, that's a shame about Dad, but he was a jerk, and then he realizes he was a good guy. It was his dad. He didn't understand what was going on with his dad, but it's still his father. It still affects him. So that was a really good issue 14. I thought moved really well, had a lot of action, a lot of emotion, and then 16, I thought wrapped it up pretty well. I was kind of enjoying, the little asides of Tombstone trying to find a way to make the amulet work, instead of it just turning him into pale Darkhawk or something. I thought that was kind of a nice running gag. Like, okay, we'll get this scientist. Okay, we'll get this magician. okay, we'll get this psychic lady working out of her apartment, you know?
He is having no luck whatsoever. I didn't put it in the synopsis, but it's interesting that we see each time like the amulet is being affected by whatever Tombstone is doing, like if they're zapping it with energy or something, Chris feels it, or I should say Darkhawk feels it in some way. He's either in agony or something like that. That happens a couple times. So again, adding to the mystery.
Yeah, so I thought it was good. I mean, there were a couple times where things may have gotten a little convenient. But I actually like the touch with the pilot of the plane going, "Oh no, you took down some drug dealers in my neighborhood. We're good." Yeah, it was a little bit of a reach maybe, but I thought it was good, and it was finally something he did as Darkhawk paying off instead of just blowing up in his face. So I guess the only downside I saw is some of the pacing. Like I said, I thought the first couple parts were a little slow, and I think some of that could have been condensed because it felt like, especially in that last issue, we were kind of rushing toward the conclusion. So I wish they could have maybe balanced it out a little better. But any complaint I really had was just minor. I mean, it was a fun comic. Even going back and reading it, 30 years after it came out for the first time. It was fun. It reminded me why I liked Darkhawk. Makes me want to go back and read even more.
Yeah, I will agree with you. Definitely the emotion gets ratcheted up here. I mean, not everybody makes it out alive, and it's sad to watch him go through that. He has to watch his dad die, and that's really sad. Not only that, I mean, he dies in Darkhawk's arms, and I don't even think that he gets the chance. Chris doesn't get the chance to tell him that he is who he is. Am I right?
No,
right.
I don't want Chris to tell me this because I do still need to go back, but I'm wondering how many people actually died because when he wakes up, the military guys are like, "Oh yeah, and the two dead bodies washed out to sea."
So some real emotion here. You see a son watch his dad die in his arms. We got Venom showing up in this thing. We got Tombstone showing up. There's just all sorts of courtroom drama going on. This is packed full of good stuff that I enjoyed. I mean, I had a good time reading this. That's for sure. In these last two issues, I wondered how, and Chris, maybe you could shed some light on this if you have a better idea of what happened in the context of the story that I just didn't get. And Evan, you can do the same thing as well. He gets the amulet back. So he beats Tombstone. He gets the amulet back. He, I guess, shoves it into the big hole in his chest. It just kind of sits there, but it doesn't automatically boom happen. He goes into the alleyway, resigns himself to basically die. And then when he starts to read the diary from his father, all of a sudden he's healed again. Did it just take time for the amulet did you interpret it as that it took time for the amulet to kind of get back into his system? Or was there something else that had to happen in order for him to change back into Chris?
Yes, there was more drama that needed to take place before. Okay. That's the only explanation I really have. And I don't think we ever really get more of an explanation than that. It's just, when he first gets the amulet back, he tries to transform it. It's not working. But as he discovering all this stuff about his dad and the cabal and everything, and then all of a sudden, maybe it's the will to live overpowers whatever constraints there were on the amulet.
I can buy
being
that.
Part of it, the actual body.
I can buy that. I mean, that's what it's interesting that he's reading this stuff happening through his dad's diary, and he's kind of understanding what happened with his dad and why his dad was doing these things that it takes him up to the day that he turned into Darkhawk, that affected the amulet some way and allowed him to change. I don't know. But
and I was wondering about that too, but the more I think about it, I almost kind of wonder if it was, I mean, they could have maybe conveyed this a little better, but maybe it didn't work that first time because he was still all keyed up. He was upset. His mom was in danger. I can't remember if he knew yet that his mom was missing, but I mean, it wasn't until then, Chris, you said they needed more drama to happen, but he didn't need to be Darkhawk right then. So maybe he was finally at peace. I mean, I don't know if if that's it. But maybe it was he was trying to jam it in before. He was still all freaked out and didn't know if his dad was a good guy or a bad guy and all this stuff. And then his mom's safe, and he knows finally that his dad was. He didn't understand all what his dad was doing, but his dad was who he thought he was. So maybe then he finally felt like, okay, I don't need to be Darkhawk right now.
Mm-hmm.
Becoming at peace. That was exactly the way I was thinking. Like, okay, he's at peace now, and boom, he changed right back into it, and somehow that affected it. But
or else they were running out of pages, and we'd already said this was part 6 of 6. So
right. All right, Chris, what do you think here, man? We finished up these last two. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you guys kind of covered most of it, but I really like all the covers to these 6 issues.
Oh yeah.
I think 14 is probably my favorite. It's one of the better Darkhawk covers, period. I mean, 13 is also good, which Evan described earlier with Venom and Darkhawk and the web is behind him. But this one, it's really dark, and Darkhawk is in the jungle, and you have a giant like hulking Venom kind of peering through the trees at him. It's just really evocative. The Manly version, Mike Manley version of Venom is a much more Eric Larson style with the long tongue and the green saliva dripping out. I really like he's got the big claws. Like his hands are bigger than Darkhawk's helmet.
Right, dude, they're huge.
And the issue 15, we see the Tombstone has got Darkhawk by the throat, and you see the reflection of Tombstone in Darkhawk's helmet, which is kind of similar to the reminiscent of the famous Hulk cover with Wolverine on the cover, and you see Wolverine in the reflection of the claws. We haven't really talked much about Mike Manley. He was the artist on the first 25 issues of Darkhawk. I really like especially the early issues that he did of Darkhawk. Later on, I know there's been some criticism of him, like in the later issues, kind of taken more of like leaning more into like the Image style, whereas his earlier issues, especially the first like 7, 8, or 9, are more of an old school Marvel, more of a reserved kind of style. And then around around this storyline and in the later teens, he kind of started to shift into more of an extreme 90s style. But this is kind of the sweet spot, I think, these 6 issues for him. That it's kind of the best of both worlds, really. He went from Darkhawk, I think, to Ghost Rider, either Ghost Rider or Spirits of Vengeance. I can't remember which one. And then after that, he went, I think, to DC, and he did... I know he was at least one of the artists, if not the full artist, on the issue where Azrael as Batman debuts the new Batman, the Asbat armor.
The Asbat suit,
and stuff like that. And he was on some of the Batman books for a while, and then not really sure what he did after that.
So he's got a lot of stuff under his belt for penciling, but inking as well. He was an inker for a lot of books, dude. At about this time, so 91, like you said, he's artist on Darkhawk, and then he's inking as well Deathlock at this point, because like I'm talking like at the same time. So he's doing art for Darkhawk and inking for Deathlock. Sleepwalker number 10, he's an inker there. He's kind of he's kind of actually he's got quite a few Sleepwalkers under his belt here. Not number 9, number 14. But yeah, DC, he starts doing inking over in DC in 93, and then just kind of like what you were talking about, becomes artist over penciler/artist in on the Batman issues. So interesting. I mean, yeah, okay, as far as art goes, perfectly fine. I have nothing to complain about here. His stylistic choice on Venom, it's unique enough to where it looks good. He doesn't have a whole lot of guest stars to deal with here, but Venom's daggone hot property to be bringing into your book and trying to draw in the early 90s. If you had the opportunity to draw Venom, I'm sure you were probably wanting to do so. Tombstone, great look. Probably would have been a lot of fun to draw because you wouldn't have to worry about, I mean, it was just all white coloring, I assume. It's just, you don't have to do a whole lot of, maybe some shading, but anyway, yeah, Tombstone's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, as far as art goes, this is perfectly fine. When we get into the story, Fingeroth doing, let's just take a look real quick, and then.
No, I was just gonna say I know he's a veteran writer, but I couldn't I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head what else. I'm sure I've read a bunch of his stuff, but
Oh, you
I
have.
think he's been all over the place at Marvel, especially.
Okay. All right. So
his
Mike's
finger off prints are all over it.
Oh no! All right. So first book he scripted, according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, 1981, February 17th, 1981 was the release date of Avengers number 207. Okay, and
I've heard of
then
them.
yeah. Then in April of 81, he becomes the scripter / writer for Dazzler, from Dazzler number 6 all the way up to issue 6 through 26 of Dazzler. So he's
Nice.
writing Dazzler that whole time.
There are people listening to this that are scoffing, but those early Dazzler issues were quality superhero comics.
That's what I've heard. Web of Spider-Man, Psy-Force. Oh, I've got a few issues of that. He's writing Psy-Force at one point. That's the Marvel New Universe stuff, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, there's Danny Fingeroth for you there, his early career. But right before Darkhawk, before he gets into Darkhawk, so he's writing Darkhawk from issue 1 forward. Like right prior to that, looks like Web of Spider-Man, some Fantastic Four. It's not a whole lot of consistent stuff. Some Marvel tales, but What If number 20? What if Spider-Man had not married Mary Jane Watson?
Oh, yeah, I got that one.
That's a good one.
Nice. Fingeroth, I think he wrote all 50 issues of Darkhawk, but I think Tom DeFalco is credited as the creator. So I'm kind of curious how that, like how much Fingeroth, how much input he had, like before launching the book, like how much of his origin was planned out, all that kind of stuff, like how that worked with DeFalco creating the character and then handing it off to Fingeroth. I've never really heard a lot about that, but
interesting. Wow, he
Sounds
stopped.
like you guys need to do another interview.
he stopped in 98, stopped writing comics in 98 with the Superman 80-page giant, Too Close to Home, and then doesn't pick up writing duties, at least according to this, until 2001, 3 years later. And then that was DC's Legends of DC Universe. Does not, well, this doesn't count then. They had 2021, April of 2021, but it's Darkhawk, Heart of the Hawk, Cry of the City. Were those new stories in that?
yeah, that was an interesting. Evan, have you read that one shot?
No.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Is that newest one?
It's that one I
just came out a year or
shared.
two ago?
Yeah, it's the one I shared when I was like, is this the one
Yeah,
you guys?
yeah. I'm sorry. I did read that one.
Okay, yeah, that was cool. They basically did 3 stories from 3 different eras of Darkhawk. They had Fingeroth and Mike Manley do, I think the longest, I think it was like a 20-page story that was set. I'm pretty sure it was set between issues 9 and 10, so right before this storyline. And then they did a story that was set in the Annihilation era, which is when they kind of brought Darkhawk back and retconned his origin, which annoyed me and a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And then they did a story that was kind of set, I think, in the future, and was like the last Chris Powell story as Darkhawk, maybe. And then a few months later, they launched a new Darkhawks miniseries with a new character as Darkhawk, which was decent. I read that. It wasn't not my Darkhawk, but not bad.
I've got the first issue. I haven't read that yet, but.
Well, they appealed directly to me by making him a basketball star, a high school basketball star.
Nice. Very
I
was
hadn't been that
also
excited about a new
they-
Marvel character since Mosaic.
Wow.
And, hey,
So
by the way, Jesse, I think I know where he went in the 90s.
where?
Fingeroth. Wikipedia says he resigned from Marvel in '95 to become editor-in-chief of Virtual Comics for Byron Price Multimedia and AOL. From there, Fingeroth served as senior vice president for creative development at Visionary Media, home of Showtime's Whirl Girl, for which he served as story editor.
Really now?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
He went
I
Hollywood.
think he might. Is he writing novels now? Does it say on the?
Let me see. He edited Right Now, a magazine about the craft of comics writing from 2003 to 2009. He wrote the Continuum Publishing book, Superman on the Couch, What Superheroes Really Tell Us About Ourselves. He's taught comics writing at NYU. Let's see. He organized Comic New York, a symposium marking writer Chris Claremont's donation of his archives of all of his major writing projects to NYU's Rare Book and Manuscript Library. So
It's interesting that, I mean, when you look at his career, I mean, it's Darkhawk. In how many issues did Darkhawk go?
50.
And he wrote every single one of them? I mean, that's...
I'm pretty sure. And there were
no,
some annuals. I think there were 3 annuals.
There are 3 annuals, and he wrote at least something in all of them because they're listed on here. He's listed as a writer. So
yeah, he did a lot of books about comics. It looks like more recently.
He did a Stan Lee biography, didn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Well, okay. That was a fun bunny trail. We learned a lot about the creators, which I love that. I love that. And Armstrong, Chris, I want to throw it back to you, man. I mean, we kind of went off on a bunny trail there. What did you have any other notes? Oh no, wait a second. I already know where I'm throwing this at. You have a story about some anchovies you have to tell.
Another one of Darkhawk's great quips.
Let me just point out in issue 15, the rematch with Tombstone was a cool fight, and then him using the electric cable on him, as he mentions in the dialogue or in the what do you call it, word balloon, whatever, in his inner monologue. That's kind of a nice bookend to his first outing as Darkhawk, where a bad guy accidentally, fried himself with some electric cables and stuff. So that was a cool bookend to an early Darkhawk story. I also like how Grace, he shows up to rescue Grace, and she ends up saving him, basically. And it appears that even if Darkhawk hadn't showed up, she was going to get out of that on her own because she was able to convince one of the captors to, let her go and stuff. So it was cool to see her kind of stand on her own and not happen to be like just a damsel in distress type, thing at the end. And I like the final page where he kind of declares that he's going to keep the amulet and continue on with his burgeoning career as a superhero. So good final note to go out on.
I do want to point out something that is mentioned in this story. I think I can't remember if it's by St. Johnny or if it was somebody else. But anyway, there's a mention about how this power that the amulet gives Chris it led me to believe that it might be addictive. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, he keeps getting the notes that say "Beware the curse of the Darkhawk" and stuff. That's something that happened in a few different issues. Yeah.
Right. So, he's got this amulet in his hand and he's about ready to throw it into the ocean. And then for all noble intents and purposes, what you think is going to happen, he's like, no, you know what? I'm going to keep it and I'm going to fight for good. And then I was like, but wait a second, bro. I mean, this thing I've just read.
You sure about this?
Yeah, this might lead to some more problems, maybe. And is it affecting him mentally to make him want to keep that in some way? Of course it is, I'd imagine. But anyway, I wanted to point that out because even though he's getting ready to throw it in, the back of my head, I was like, well, yeah, he's going to keep it. Because it's making him want to keep it. He's influenced by it. So anyway, all right. And continue, but you definitely got to tell the anchovy story.
To set it up, when he shows up to rescue Grace at this hideout where the bad guys have her, there's a pizza guy who is kind of like, I guess he's kind of hiding out behind the pizza guy, waiting on them to answer the door. And the guy knocks, and one of the hoods is like, "No anchovies, right?" And then Chris smashes the door down and just says, "No anchovies," in a stern voice. So it reminded me of Darkhawk. Issue 50 came out. There was very little Darkhawk for several years. And in the year 2001, there was a War Machine miniseries, and it was a Max book. So one of the early Marvel Max comics. And it was set in its own continuity, not in the Marvel Universe proper. And it was Jim Rhodes in a War Machine story. I really liked it. I'm blanking on the writer's name.
I think it was Chuck Austin, wasn't it?
Yeah, Chuck Austin. That's correct. Yes. So have you read this, Evan?
No, I just I flipped through it at the store and decided against it.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's a hard R comic.
Oh, boy.
Nudity, there's expletives, stuff like that. But a really cool story, and it's kind of like a spy, it's a S.H.I.E.L.D. story where James Rhodes has the War Machine armor, and there are other characters that have their own armors. I don't remember what Tony started. It's been a long time since I've read it. But in the midst of, I think it was a 12-issue book, and in the midst of it, there's like this super secret project that they bring out to help them on one of their missions, and it's Darkhawk. And he's essentially like a cyborg, and they have to be real easy with him because he's crazy, basically.
Oh, wow.
He'll say stuff like he's never aware of what's actually going on. In his head, it's always like a VR simulation. So they can try to direct him that way because he's way more powerful than any of the War Machine armors and stuff like that. And so like he'll be talking to other characters and he'll be like, it'll be dialogue from like Avengers West Coast, where he's like, Mockingbird, can you throw that guy over here and I'll take care of him or whatever. And they're like, what's he talking about? And there's a point where I think they think he's dead. I think his head gets blown off or something. So they're bringing the carcass back on the plane after the mission. It's kind of like a silent moment where they're all just kind of sitting there with the dead body on the table. And then a second head like pops out. And the Darkhawk body sits up and goes, "No anchovies."
Oh no!
And then falls back down on the slab, basically.
That's great.
Yeah, at the time he had not appeared outside of a few cameos where he barely even spoke. In like an Avengers issue or maybe a Wolverine issue in like a crowd shot. So having like any Darkhawk in my life was huge at that moment, and it was a really cool angle on a Darkhawk. And he looks basically nothing like Darkhawk. He's just like a big mech suit looking character, but that moment was really funny.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's good stuff.
Nice.
All right,
Jesse, you may have noticed something I didn't touch on, and you may have thought that was because we did a whole show about it. I don't know what format you guys were reading this in, but I have the original issues. And in issue 13, there's a bullpen bulletins page with the January cool-o-meter.
Oh, I love these. I
have a bone to
these.
pick because the top, the coolest things are non-sexual harassment, Red Fox, and Anne Margaret. The most uncool thing is Scarlet, the sequel to Gone with the Wind, which I do remember some people being upset about back then. But 1, 2, 3 slots above Scarlet is Squirrel Girl.
Oh no!
And this must have been just right after her first appearance. And I get it. She wasn't fully formed. She wasn't as amazing then as she is now. But bad form, Marvel.
Yeah, that is sad.
They're on the wrong side of history.
Yeah, there you go. She's just above pregnant women on magazine covers and parodies of same.
That is some crazy stuff. Okay, well, hey, Heart of the Hawk. We did it, guys. We definitely did it.
Just want to thank you guys for indulging me because I was super excited to get some Darkhawk in. I think the plan is to continue with more early 90s goodness and turn this into kind of a Darkhawk Sleepwalker trilogy.
Right.
Because there's a Sleepwalker 4-part story, the first multi-part kind of Sleepwalker epic called Color Blindness that I think we're going to try and do in the near future. And then we'll finish it, polish it off with the much ballyhooed and long-awaited Darkhawk Sleepwalker crossover, which took place a few months after each of these respective storylines took place.
Yeah, man.
I still remember reading that one because I was reading both of them at this point, and I turned the page and Sleepwalker shows up, and I'm like, what? Oh, man. Somebody wrote this just for me.
Yeah. I mean, the letter pages in both those books were always like, hey, when's Darkhawk going to show up? Or when's Sleepwalker going to guest star? So it was something that us 90s comic nerds were excited about.
Great stuff. This would be a good time to plug a sponsor of the W2M network, and that is Grammarly. For you, the listeners of Unspoken Issues, Grammarly is offering a free download of the Grammarly software. Grammarly's AI-powered products help people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2M network. Again, that's getgrammarly.com/W2M network to download Grammarly for free. All right, well, let's go ahead. We'll get into plugs here. Evan Bevins, we'll start with you, man. Tell the people where they can find you.
Well, you can find my writings and ramblings about comics and movies about comics, comics about movies, etc. at *51.blogspot.com. I've managed at this point to get 100 posts on there, for better or worse. there's a little bit of Darkhawk there with my read through of the first 3 issues of Secret Defenders, and I'm about to jump back on that with my favorite Doctor Strange story, where he assembles a new team, including the aforementioned Sleepwalker, to take on the villain Roadkill.
Roadkill.
And Jesse, you know who else is on that team?
Tell me. Punisher?
The Punisher.
Yes, baby. I love it.
So I haven't read that in a long time. That was my favorite Secret Defenders arc. I'm gonna see if it's more than just a odd memory, if it still holds up.
Well, we'll find out. And again there, Evan, congratulations on hitting 100 blog posts. Whenever this airs, I'm sure you'll be at 150. But congratulations, sir.
We'll see about that. Thank you.
Fantastic milestone. Chris Armstrong, buddy, you brought us here for Darkhawk, the heart of the Hawk. Now, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at BrodyMan34. You can also catch me on Jesse's other podcast occasionally. And then I've got my own podcast, Small Screeners, where me and my buddy AJ take a look at direct-to-video and made-for-TV movies of the past. So we've got a couple episodes of that. We do it monthly. Got one coming up that I'm going to be recording actually later tonight on Chud 2. Bud the Chud. So you can find that at Small Screeners. There's also a Twitter and Instagram account for it at Small Screeners.
Well, hey, I'll throw in my canned plugs here at the end. Just make sure to go check out the w2mnet.com. We have all sorts of podcasts over there, just about anything you can think of. Right here at hosts Unspoken Issues. We also have the Source Material Comics podcast. And, I'm guest starring on a bunch of stuff with Mark Radulich all the time, either TV Party Tonight or maybe talking about a Damn You Hollywood. You never know. But I'm definitely on the Metal Hammer of Doom just about every Wednesday. That, I think, will be that. So, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight. For Chris Armstrong, for Evan Bevins, I am Jesse Starcher. We'll be talking to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com and the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.